The autumn wind swept through the grounds of Windsor Castle, carrying with it the weight of unspoken truths and years of carefully maintained silence. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood at the tall window of her private sitting room, her fingers pressed against the cold glass as she watched the leaves dance in their final moments before winter claimed them completely. The phone call she had just received still echoed in her mind, each word etched with the gravity of what was to come. Charles had been diagnosed with cancer. The words felt foreign, impossible even, when applied to the man who had always seemed so resilient, so determined to fulfill his destiny as king. But now, as Catherine processed the news, she realized that beneath the crown and the carefully orchestrated public appearances, Charles was simply a father, a grandfather, and a man facing his own mortality. The relationship between Catherine and her father-in-law had not always been smooth. In the early days of her courtship with William, there had been moments of tension, subtle disapprovals masked behind polite smiles and diplomatic conversations. Charles had questioned whether a commoner could truly understand the weight of royal duty, whether she possessed the strength necessary to support his son through the challenges that lay ahead. Those doubts had created an invisible barrier between them, one that had taken years to slowly dismantle. But time had a way of revealing character, and Catherine had proven herself again and again. Through the births of her children, the public scrutiny, the endless royal engagements, and the personal struggles that came with life in the spotlight, she had shown a grace and resilience that even Charles could not deny. Gradually, the formal politeness had given way to genuine respect, and eventually to something deeper, a bond forged through shared understanding of what it meant to serve the crown. As Catherine stood by the window, memories flooded her mind. She remembered the day Charles had quietly taken her aside after a particularly difficult period when the media had been especially harsh in their criticism of her parenting choices. Instead of offering empty platitudes, he had shared his own struggles with public perception during his early years as heir to the throne. His vulnerability in that moment had surprised her, and she had seen past the royal persona to the man beneath. There had been other moments, too, small gestures that had gradually built trust between them. The way he had insisted on walking with her through the gardens at Highgrove, sharing his passion for organic farming and environmental conservation. How he had listened intently when she spoke about her work with early childhood development, offering not just polite interest, but genuine engagement with her ideas. The pride in his eyes when he watched her interact with his grandchildren, seeing how naturally she balanced being both a loving mother and a future queen. The news of his illness had shattered the careful equilibrium of their world. William had been the one to tell her, his voice steady but his hands trembling as he relayed the conversation he had just had with his father. The cancer was serious, the treatment plan aggressive, and the prognosis uncertain. The very foundation of their future seemed to shift beneath them, forcing them all to confront the fragility of the institution they served and the man who embodied it. Catherine's mind turned to Princess and Charles's sister, who had always been a formidable presence within the royal family. Known for her no-nonsense approach and tireless work ethic, and had never been one to show emotion publicly. She had weathered scandals, personal tragedies, and decades of public service with an almost stoic determination that had earned her respect both within the family and among the British people. But Catherine knew that beneath its tough exterior lay a deep love for her brother. Despite their occasional disagreements and different approaches to royal duty, and had always been fiercely protective of Charles. She had supported him through his tumultuous marriage to Diana, stood by him during the difficult years that followed, and celebrated with genuine joy when he finally found happiness with Camilla. The thought of how and would react to this news filled Catherine with a profound sadness. She knew that, and would want to be strong, to provide the steady support that Charles would need during his treatment. But Catherine also understood that even the strongest among them had their breaking point, and the prospect of losing her brother would test Anne's resolve in ways that decades of public service had not. Catherine's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from William, letting her know that he was on his way home from an emergency meeting at Clarence House. The machinery of the monarchy was already in motion, contingency plans being activated, schedules being rearranged. But beneath all the protocol and procedure, Catherine knew that her husband was struggling with the same emotions she felt: fear, uncertainty, and the overwhelming desire to somehow make everything right again. She moved away from the window and settled into her favorite armchair, a piece she had chosen herself when they had first moved into their current residence. It had been one of the small ways she had tried to make their royal life feel more personal, more connected to who they were as individuals rather than just as representatives of the crown. The children would need to be told, though Catherine and William had agreed to wait until they knew more about Charles's treatment plan and prognosis. George, Charlotte, and Louis adored their grandfather, and Catherine dreaded the moment when she would have to explain that he was sick, that the future they had all taken for granted might be changing in ways they couldn't yet understand. She thought about the last time they had all been together, a family dinner at Sandringham just a few weeks earlier. Charles had been in such good spirits, playing with the children in the drawing room after dinner, telling them stories about his own childhood, and sharing his plans for various projects he hoped to accomplish in the coming year. There had been no sign of the illness that was already taking hold within his body, no indication that their world was about to be turned upside down. Catherine realized that she needed to see, and before the news became public, before the weight of royal protocol made honest conversation more difficult, and deserved to hear about Charles's condition from family, not from palace officials or medical bulletins. More importantly, Catherine felt a growing conviction that and would need someone to talk to, someone who understood the unique pressures and responsibilities that came with being part of the royal family. The relationship between Catherine and Anne had been built slowly over the years, founded on mutual respect rather than easy familiarity, and had initially been skeptical of Catherine, viewing her with the same wariness she applied to most newcomers to royal life. But Catherine's dedication to her charitable work and her obvious love for William and the children had gradually won Anne's approval. They had found common ground in their shared commitment to their royal duties and their protective instincts toward the family, and had been particularly impressed with how Catherine had handled the intense media attention surrounding her children, maintaining their privacy while still fulfilling her public obligations. In quiet moments, and had even offered Catherine advice on managing the pressures of royal life, sharing insights gained from her own decades of experience. As evening approached, Catherine made her decision. She would go to Anne's residence at Gatcombe Park the next morning. It would be an informal visit, ostensibly to discuss an upcoming joint engagement they had planned. But, in reality, it would be an opportunity for Catherine to offer her support and to ensure that Anne didn't face this difficult time alone. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on Catherine as she prepared for William's return. The months to come would test all of them in ways they had never imagined. Charles would need to undergo treatment, while somehow continuing to fulfill his duties as king. William would have to prepare for responsibilities he had hoped wouldn't come for many more years. The children would have to cope with seeing their grandfather struggle with illness. And Catherine knew that her own role would become even more crucial. She would need to be a source of strength for her husband, a comfort to her children, and a steady presence as the royal family navigated this unprecedented challenge. The training and preparation she had received over the years had covered many scenarios, but nothing had quite prepared her for the emotional reality of watching the family she had come to love face such uncertainty. As she heard William's car in the driveway, Catherine took a deep breath and prepared herself for the conversation that would begin to chart their course through the difficult days ahead. She thought of the words she would need to find, the comfort she would need to provide, and the strength she would need to summon from somewhere deep within herself. The future had always been carefully planned within the royal family, each step mapped out according to tradition and protocol. But Now, with Charles's diagnosis changing everything, they would all need to find new ways to serve their country and support each other. Catherine felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, but alongside that weight came a fierce determination to protect her family and to honor the trust that the British people had placed in them. The autumn wind continued to blow outside, but inside, Catherine began to prepare for the battles that lay ahead, knowing that her words and actions in the coming days would help determine how her family survived this greatest test of all. The morning drive to Gatcombe Park felt longer than usual, each mile bringing Catherine closer to one of the most difficult conversations she had ever anticipated having. The countryside rolled past her window in a blur of frost-touched fields and bare trees, the landscape reflecting the stark reality that winter was approaching, both literally and metaphorically for the royal family. Catherine had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of how to approach and with the devastating news about Charles. William had been equally restless, the two of them lying awake in the dark, whispering about the implications of his father's diagnosis and what it would mean for their family and the monarchy itself. They had talked through various scenarios, trying to prepare for the difficult conversations that lay ahead, but nothing could truly ready them for the emotional weight of what they were about to face. When Catherine's car pulled up to the elegant Georgian facade of Gatcombe Park, she was struck by how normal everything appeared. The estate looked exactly as it always did, with its well-maintained gardens and the same sense of quiet dignity that Anne had cultivated over the decades she had lived there. It was a reminder that devastating news didn't announce itself with fanfare or obvious signs. It simply arrived, uninvited, and changed everything in its wake. And greeted Catherine at the door herself, as was her custom when receiving family members for informal visits. Dressed in her typical practical attire of country tweeds and sensible shoes, and looked every bit the capable, no-nonsense royal she had always been. But Catherine noticed the slight tension around her eyes, a barely perceptible sign that sensed something was different about this visit. They settled in Anne's private sitting room, a comfortable space filled with personal photographs and mementos from Anne's decades of royal service and her passion for equestrian sports. The walls told the story of a life dedicated to duty, with images of and countless official engagements, but also more intimate family photos showing her with her children and grandchildren, and particularly treasured pictures of her with Charles for various stages of their lives. Catherine accepted the tea that Anne offered, using the familiar ritual as a way to gather her courage for what she needed to say. They exchanged pleasantries about the children and upcoming engagements, but Catherine could see that and was becoming increasingly aware that something significant was troubling her sister-in-law, and had always been perceptive, and her years of experience in reading people during royal encounters had made her particularly skilled at detecting when something was wrong. Finally, Catherine knew she could delay no longer. She set down her teacup and took a deep breath, meeting Anne's direct gaze. The words she had rehearsed seemed inadequate now, faced with the reality of having to deliver such life-altering news. But she pushed forward, knowing that Anne deserved to hear this from family rather than through official channels. She began by explaining that Charles had undergone some routine medical tests following concerns about his health. Anne's expression immediately sharpened, her posture straightening as she prepared herself for what was clearly going to be serious news. Catherine could see the fear flickering in Anne's eyes, though her sister-in-law's years of maintaining composure in difficult situations kept her outward appearance calm and controlled. When Catherine finally spoke the word cancer, the effect on Anne was immediate and profound. Despite her legendary stoicism, Anne's face went pale, and, for a moment, she seemed to struggle for breath. Catherine watched as Anne processed the information, seeing her mind immediately race to questions about treatment options, prognosis, and what this would mean for Charles's ability to fulfill his role as king. Anne's first concern, characteristically, was for her brother's well-being rather than the implications for the monarchy. She asked detailed questions about the type of cancer, the treatment plan, and Charles's response to the diagnosis. Catherine shared what she knew, while being honest about the uncertainties that remained. The medical team was cautiously optimistic, but the coming months would be crucial in determining the effectiveness of the treatment. As the reality of the situation began to sink in, Catherine could see and struggling with emotions she rarely allowed herself to express, and had always been the steady rock of the royal family, the one who could be counted on to fulfill her duties without complaint and to provide unwavering support during difficult times. But now, faced with the possibility of losing her brother, the careful walls she had built around her emotions began to show cracks, and spoke quietly about her memories of growing up with Charles, sharing stories that Catherine had never heard before. She talked about how protective she had always felt toward her older brother, despite his position as heir to the throne. She described the burden she had watched him carry throughout his life, the constant scrutiny and the weight of expectation that had shaped every decision he made. Catherine found herself deeply moved by Anne's vulnerability in this moment. She had always respected Anne's strength and dedication, but now she was seeing a different side of her sister-in-law. The sister who had watched her brother navigate decades of public service and personal challenges, who had celebrated his triumphs and worried about his struggles. The conversation turned to practical matters, as both women tried to process what Charles's illness would mean for the functioning of the royal family. Anne's mind immediately went to the additional responsibilities that would fall on William's shoulders, and her concern for how he would cope with the accelerated timeline for taking on more significant duties. She worried about the pressure this would place on Catherine as well, recognizing that her sister-in-law would need to step up in ways that had previously been years in the future. Catherine shared her own fears about how to tell the children, particularly George, who was old enough to understand the implications but still young enough to be deeply frightened by the idea of his grandfather being seriously ill, and listened thoughtfully, offering insights from her own experience of helping her children navigate the unique challenges that came with being part of the royal family. They discussed the importance of maintaining as much normalcy as possible for the children while still preparing them for the changes that were coming, and emphasized the need to be honest with them about Charles's condition while also reassuring them about the support systems that would remain in place. She shared her belief that children were often more resilient than adults gave them credit for, particularly when they felt secure in their family's love and support. As the afternoon wore on, Catherine found herself taking on an unexpected role as comforter and counselor to Anne. She had come prepared to be the bearer of difficult news, but she discovered that Anne needed someone to simply listen as she processed her fears and emotions about her brother's illness. It was a reversal of the typical dynamic between them, with Catherine providing support to the woman who had always been seen as unshakable, and spoke about her regrets. Times when royal duties had kept her from spending more time with Charles, moments when protocol had prevented her from expressing her affection and support as freely as she would have liked. She talked about the conversations she wished she had had with him, the things she wanted to make sure he knew about how much he meant to her, and how proud she was of the king he had become. Catherine found herself sharing her own reflections on the preciousness of family time, and the way that royal life could sometimes create barriers even between people who loved each other deeply. She talked about her determination to ensure that her own children understood how much they were loved, regardless of the formal roles they might one day have to play. The two women also discussed the media attention that would inevitably follow once Charles's diagnosis became public, and expressed her frustration with the way the press often sensationalized royal health issues, turning private family matters into public spectacles. Catherine shared her own strategies for protecting her family's privacy while still acknowledging the public's legitimate interest in the health of their monarch. As evening approached, both women realized that this conversation had marked a turning point in their relationship. The formal politeness that had sometimes characterized their interactions had given way to genuine intimacy and mutual support. They had faced one of the most difficult challenges imaginable together, and in doing so, they had discovered new depths to their connection as family members, and walked Catherine to her car. And for a moment, the two women simply stood together in the gathering dusk, both lost in their own thoughts about the uncertain future that lay ahead. Catherine could see that and was already beginning to steel herself for the battles to come, drawing on the reservoir of strength that had sustained her through decades of royal service. Before Catherine got into her car and took her hand and squeezed it gently, a simple gesture that conveyed more than words could express about the bond that had been forged between them that day. Catherine knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she and would face them together, united in their love for Charles and their determination to support him through his illness. The drive home gave Catherine time to process the emotional intensity of the afternoon. She had witnessed Anne's vulnerability and strength in equal measure, and she felt a profound sense of privilege of being trusted with her sister-in-law's fears and hopes. She also felt the weight of responsibility for the role she would need to play in the difficult months ahead, not just as a member of the royal family, but as someone who could provide emotional support to those who were struggling with the implications of Charles's diagnosis. 3 weeks had passed since Catherine's visit to Gackham Park, and the palace had managed to maintain its carefully orchestrated routine despite the seismic shift that Charles's diagnosis had created behind closed doors. The public remained unaware of the king's condition, though eagle-eyed royal watchers had begun to notice subtle changes in the schedule of engagements and the increased presence of William at events that would normally have been Charles's exclusive domain. Catherine found herself walking a delicate tightrope during this period, maintaining her public composure while privately supporting both her husband and the extended family as they grappled with the new reality. The weight of keeping such a significant secret felt enormous, particularly during public engagements where she was expected to smile and interact naturally with crowds who had no idea that their monarch was facing a life-threatening illness. The children had been told about their grandfather's condition in terms that were honest, but age-appropriate. George, now old enough to understand the gravity of illness, had reacted with a maturity that both impressed and broke Catherine's heart. He had asked thoughtful questions about treatment and recovery, but Catherine could see the fear in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Charlotte, ever empathetic, had immediately wanted to make cards and gifts for her grandfather, while Louis, still too young to fully comprehend the situation, continued with his usual exuberance, though he seemed to sense the underlying tension in the adults around him. William had thrown himself into his royal duties with an intensity that concerned Catherine. She watched as her husband shouldered additional responsibilities with typical determination, but she could see the toll it was taking on him emotionally. The prospect of becoming king sooner than anticipated weighed heavily on him, not because he wasn't prepared for the role, but because it meant losing his father before he was ready to let go. During this period, Catherine had maintained regular contact with Anne, checking in on her sister-in-law's emotional state and offering support when needed, and had responded to Charles's diagnosis by increasing her own workload, taking on additional engagements to help maintain the royal family's public presence. But Catherine could see that this was Anne's way of coping with her fear and helplessness. By staying busy, she could avoid dwelling on thoughts she found too painful to bear. The first treatment session had gone as well as could be expected, with Charles showing his characteristic determination to minimize the impact of his illness on his royal duties. He had insisted on maintaining his schedule wherever possible, though his medical team had convinced him to scale back some of his more physically demanding engagements. Catherine admired his resilience, but she worried about the toll that trying to appear strong and healthy was taking on his overall well-being. It was during this tense period that an opportunity arose for a private family gathering at Balmoral. Charles had expressed a desire to spend time with his children and grandchildren in a setting that felt more personal and less formal than their usual royal residences. The Scottish castle had always held special significance for the royal family, representing a place where they could let down their guard and simply be together as relatives rather than as representatives of the crown. Catherine felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety about the planned gathering. She knew that it would provide a precious opportunity for the family to connect on a deeper level, but she also feared that being together in such an intimate setting might make Charles's illness feel more real and immediate for everyone involved. The children were excited about the trip, looking forward to time with their grandfather and the outdoor activities that Balmoral always provided. The journey to Scotland felt significant in ways that went beyond the usual family vacation. Catherine found herself paying attention to small details. The way Charles moved a little more slowly than usual, the careful way he positioned himself in photographs, the subtle signs of fatigue that appeared despite his efforts to maintain his normal energy level. She realized that everyone in the family was engaged in the same careful observation, all of them hyper-aware of changes that might indicate how well the treatment was working. And arrived at Balmoral the evening after the rest of the family, having delayed her journey to attend a memorial service for a military regiment of which she was patron. Catherine watched as and greeted Charles, noting the way her sister-in-law's eyes searched her brother's face for signs of how he was truly feeling beneath the brave front he maintained for everyone else's benefit. The first few days of the gathering proceeded with carefully maintained normalcy. Charles insisted on participating in the traditional activities, walks through the estate, visits to local landmarks, and family dinners in the castle's more intimate dining rooms. The grandchildren delighted in having their grandfather's undivided attention, and Catherine could see how much joy these interactions brought to Charles, even as they clearly tired him more than usual. But it was during a quiet evening, when the children were upstairs and the adults were gathered in the drawing room for after-dinner conversation, that the carefully maintained facade finally began to crack. Charles had been sharing stories about his own childhood visits to Balmoral, reminiscing about adventures he had shared with his own siblings, and the lessons his mother had tried to impart about their responsibilities to the nation. The conversation had taken on a reflective quality, with Charles speaking more openly than usual about his hopes and fears for the future of the monarchy. He talked about his pride in William's development as a future king and his confidence that the institution would be in good hands. But underneath his words, Catherine could hear the unspoken concern about whether he would live to see his son fully prepared for the role that would inevitably be his. It was then that Anne, who had been unusually quiet throughout the evening, asked a question that seemed to come from deep within her heart. She wanted to know if Charles was afraid, not about the monarchy or his duties, but about the personal journey he was facing with his illness. The directness of her question surprised everyone, including and herself, but it opened a door to a conversation they all needed to have. Charles's response was characteristically honest and thoughtful. He admitted to moments of fear, not primarily about death itself, but about leaving his family and his country before he felt he had accomplished everything he hoped to achieve as king. He spoke about his regrets regarding missed opportunities to spend time with those he loved, and his determination to make the most of whatever time remained to him. Catherine found herself deeply moved by the vulnerability Charles showed in that moment. She had always respected him as a king and as her father-in-law, but now she saw him as a man facing the ultimate test with dignity and courage. The conversation that followed was unlike any they had ever shared as a family, characterized by honesty and emotional intimacy that their royal roles had often prevented. William spoke about his fears regarding stepping into his father's shoes, not because he doubted his ability to serve as king, but because he wasn't ready to lose his father's guidance and support. Catherine shared her own concerns about helping their children understand and cope with the changes that were coming, while also ensuring that they maintained their connection to their grandfather regardless of what the future held. But it was Anne's response that surprised everyone the most. With tears threatening to spill from her eyes, an almost unprecedented display of emotion from someone known for her steely composure, she began to speak about her brother with a tenderness that revealed the depth of her love for him. She talked about how proud she was of the man and the king he had become, despite all the challenges and criticisms he had faced throughout his life. and spoke about watching Charles navigate the difficulties of his first marriage while maintaining his commitment to his royal duties. She described her admiration for his environmental advocacy at a time when such concerns were not popular or widely understood. She talked about the joy she felt when he finally found happiness with Camilla, and how that happiness had made him a better king and a more complete person. As Anne continued speaking, her voice began to break with emotion. She talked about her fears of losing her brother, but also about her regrets regarding times when royal protocol had prevented her from expressing her feelings more openly. She wished she had told him more often how much she admired his dedication and how grateful she was for the example he had set for all of them about service and duty. The room fell silent as Anne struggled to maintain her composure, finally allowing the tears she had held back for weeks to flow freely. It was a moment that none of them would ever forget, seeing the strongest member of their family reveal the depth of her love and fear in such an open and vulnerable way. Catherine found herself getting up from her chair and moving to Anne's side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. In that gesture, she was offering not just sympathy, but acknowledgement of the courage it had taken for her and to share her feelings so honestly. The two women looked at each other, and Catherine could see that their relationship had evolved into something much deeper than mere family obligation. Charles, clearly moved by his sister's words, rose from his chair and embraced Anne, a simple gesture that conveyed more than any formal expression of affection could have accomplished. In that moment, the carefully maintained boundaries between their public roles and their private emotions dissolved completely, leaving only two siblings who loved each other deeply and were facing an uncertain future together. The evening concluded with a sense of catharsis that surprised everyone involved. By allowing themselves to express their fears and emotions openly, they had strengthened the bonds between them and created a foundation of honesty that would sustain them through the difficult months ahead. Catherine realized that this moment at Balmoral would become a touchstone for all of them, a reminder that even in the most challenging circumstances, their love for each other remained the most powerful force in their lives. The morning after the emotional evening at Balmoral, Catherine woke before dawn with a sense of clarity that had been absent for weeks. The honest conversation they had shared the night before had not solved any of the practical challenges they faced, but it had created a new foundation of openness that felt both precious and fragile. She knew that the day ahead would bring continued uncertainty about Charles's health, but she also felt that the family was now better equipped to face that uncertainty together. As she made her way quietly through the castle's corridors, Catherine reflected on how profoundly the past month had changed her understanding of what it meant to be part of the royal family. She had always known that duty and service were central to their identity, but she now understood that love and vulnerability were equally important components of their strength. The walls between public duty and private emotion that she had thought were necessary for survival had proven to be barriers that prevented them from supporting each other as fully as they could. Catherine found herself in the castle's library, a room that had always provided comfort with its floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books spanning centuries of knowledge and wisdom. She settled into one of the leather armchairs near the window, watching as the Scottish Highlands emerged from the morning mist. The landscape seemed to mirror her own emotional state, initially obscured and uncertain, but gradually revealing its true character as conditions became clearer. She thought about Anne's breakdown the previous evening, recognizing it not as a sign of weakness, but as a demonstration of courage, and had spent decades maintaining a public persona of unwavering strength. And it had taken tremendous bravery to allow herself to be vulnerable in front of her family. Catherine realized that this moment had changed something fundamental in their relationships with each other, creating space for honesty that would be essential in the months ahead. The sound of footsteps in the corridor drew Catherine's attention, and she turned to see Charles entering the library. Despite the early hour, he was already dressed for the day, though she noticed he moved with less energy than usual. When he saw her, he smiled with genuine warmth and joined her near the window, settling into the chair beside her with a slight grimace that he tried to hide. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts while appreciating the peaceful morning atmosphere. Finally, Charles spoke, thanking Catherine for the support she had shown to and to the entire family during this difficult period. He expressed his admiration for the way she had stepped into a role she hadn't expected to play so soon, providing emotional strength to family members who were accustomed to being the ones offering support to others. Catherine found herself able to respond with honesty that matched what Charles had shared the night before. She told him about her initial fears and uncertainties when she learned of his diagnosis, and how those feelings had evolved into a determination to help her family navigate this challenge together. She spoke about her deep respect for him as both a king and a father-in-law, and her commitment to supporting William as he prepared for the additional responsibilities that were coming his way. The conversation between them took on an intimacy that their relationship had been building toward for years but had never quite achieved. Charles shared his thoughts about legacy, not just the formal achievements of his reign, but the impact he hoped to have on his family's ability to serve with both dignity and humanity. He expressed his hope that his grandchildren would remember him not just as a king, but as a grandfather who loved them deeply and who had tried to prepare them for the unique challenges they would face. Catherine assured him that George, Charlotte, and Louis already understood how much their grandfather loved them, and that she and William were committed to ensuring that Charles's influence on their lives would continue regardless of what the future held. She talked about the values he had demonstrated through his environmental advocacy, his support for charitable causes, and his dedication to modernizing the monarchy while preserving its essential character. As they continued talking, Catherine found herself sharing concerns she had kept private even from William. She spoke about the pressure she felt to be strong for everyone else while dealing with her own fears about the future. Charles listened with the same thoughtful attention he brought to his official duties, offering insights gained from his decades of experience in balancing personal emotions with public responsibilities. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Anne, who appeared in the doorway, looking somewhat embarrassed about her emotional display the night before. Catherine immediately rose to embrace her sister-in-law, making it clear that there was nothing to apologize for and that Anne's honesty had been exactly what the family needed. Charles echoed these sentiments, expressing his gratitude for Anne's willingness to share her feelings so openly. The three of them spent the next hour discussing practical matters related to Charles's treatment and the adjustments that would need to be made to the royal family schedule and responsibilities. But these conversations were now grounded in the emotional honesty they had established, making it easier to address difficult topics and make decisions that prioritized both Charles's health and the family's well-being, and spoke about her intention to increase her public engagements to help maintain the royal family's visibility while Charles focused on his treatment. Catherine offered to take on additional responsibilities as well, recognizing that her role as a senior member of the family would need to expand more quickly than originally anticipated. William joined them during this discussion, having been awakened by the sound of their conversation, and together they began to develop a plan that would allow them to support Charles while continuing to serve the public effectively. As the morning progressed, other members of the family gathered for breakfast, and Catherine was struck by how different the atmosphere felt compared to previous family gatherings. The children seemed to sense that something important had shifted among the adults, and they responded by being more affectionate and attentive than usual. George, in particular, made a point of sitting close to his grandfather and asking thoughtful questions about the history of Balmoral and the royal family's connection to Scotland. Catherine watched these interactions with a mixture of joy and sadness, recognizing that they were creating memories that would become increasingly precious as Charles's treatment progressed. She found herself paying attention to small details, the way Charles laughed at Louis's jokes, the patience he showed in explaining royal traditions to Charlotte, the pride in his eyes when George demonstrated his growing understanding of the responsibilities that would one day be his. After breakfast, the family gathered for what had become a traditional walk through the estate grounds. Charles insisted on participating despite his reduced energy levels, though he accepted William's suggestion that they take a shorter route than usual. Catherine found herself walking beside, and the two women continued the conversation they had begun the night before about supporting each other through the challenges ahead, and spoke about her determination to be present for Charles in whatever way would be most helpful, while also maintaining her own royal duties and supporting the broader family. Catherine shared her commitment to ensuring that the children maintained their close relationship with their grandfather while also helping them understand and cope with the changes that were coming. Together, they began to develop strategies for creating stability and continuity in the midst of uncertainty. As they walked, Catherine realized that the words she had been searching for since learning of Charles's diagnosis were finally becoming clear to her. She understood now that what Charles needed most was not false optimism or attempts to minimize the seriousness of a situation, but rather honest acknowledgement of the challenges he faced combined with unwavering support for his determination to continue serving as king for as long as possible. The family gathering at Balmoral concluded with a sense of unity and purpose that surprised everyone involved. They had faced their fears together and emerged with a deeper understanding of their love for each other and their commitment to supporting one another through whatever lay ahead. Catherine knew that the road ahead would be difficult, with challenges they couldn't yet anticipate, but she also felt confident that they would face those challenges together. On the final evening of their stay, Catherine found herself once again in conversation with Charles and this time in the castle's drawing room where they had shared their emotional breakthrough just a few days earlier. The atmosphere was different now, still serious, but characterized by acceptance rather than fear and hope rather than despair. Charles spoke about his gratitude for the family he had been given and his determination to make the most of whatever time remained to him, and expressed her commitment to supporting him in every way possible while also maintaining her own service to the crown. Catherine shared her understanding of the role she would need to play in supporting both her husband and the broader family as they navigated this unprecedented situation. As they prepared to return to their respective homes and resume their public duties, Catherine felt that she finally understood what needed to be said. The words came to her not as a dramatic declaration, but as a simple acknowledgement of the love and commitment that had always existed within their family, but had rarely been expressed so directly. When a moment felt right, Catherine spoke quietly to Charles, telling him that she was honored to be part of a family that faced adversity with such courage and love. She assured him that no matter what the future held, his legacy of service and dedication would continue through William and the children, and that the values he had taught them would guide their actions for generations to come. Her words seemed to give Charles a sense of peace that had been absent since his diagnosis, and Catherine realized that sometimes the most powerful statements were also the simplest. In acknowledging their love for each other and their commitment to facing the future together, they had found a source of strength that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The royal family's return to their regular duties was marked by a renewed sense of purpose and unity that observers noticed but couldn't quite explain. Catherine knew that the emotional journey they had shared at Balmoral would remain private, but its effects would be visible in the way they supported each other and served their country in the months to come. The words she had finally found to express her feelings had not changed the reality of Charles's illness, but they had strengthened the bonds that would help them all endure whatever lay ahead.